I accidentally recorded my mother-in-law plotting to poison my food. 30 seconds later, her perfect family started falling apart. My name is Natalie Carter, and I'm 32 years old. People always say you marry a family, not just a person. For 5 years, I laughed whenever someone said that. Now I know they weren't joking. Looking back, I think the strangest part wasn't what my mother-in-law tried to do. It was how many warning signs I ignored because I loved her son. My husband, Daniel Carter, is 34. We met 8 years ago, married 3 years later, and built what I honestly believed was a quiet, stable life. We weren't rich. We weren't flashy. We had a small house, 2 rescue dogs, movie nights every Friday, and the kind of routine that made ordinary days feel safe. Or at least I thought they were safe. His mother, Eleanor, never liked me. She never actually said those words, but she never had to. Disapproval can hide inside a smile. It can arrive wrapped in politeness. It can sound like concern while leaving tiny cuts that never completely heal. The first time I met her, she hugged me for exactly 2 seconds before stepping back and saying, "You're much quieter than Daniel's ex." I laughed because I assumed she was trying to make conversation. Daniel squeezed my hand beneath the table. "That's just Mom," he whispered afterward. "She doesn't always think before she talks." I believed him. Then came Christmas. Eleanor gave everyone personalized gifts. Daniel received an expensive leather wallet. His sister Chloe got diamond earrings. Arthur, my father-in-law, opened a custom fishing rod he'd wanted for months. When my turn came, Eleanor smiled brightly and handed me a cookbook titled Traditional Family Recipes Every Wife Should Know. "I figured," she said sweetly, "it might help." Everyone chuckled. I forced a smile. Daniel looked embarrassed but simply muttered, "Mom." That became a pattern. Every holiday, every birthday, every visit brought another comparison, another cutting remark, another reminder that I would never quite belong. She constantly mentioned Daniel's ex-girlfriend, Rebecca, as if she were the invisible guest at every family dinner. Rebecca always made homemade rolls. Rebecca remembered Arthur's birthday. Rebecca never argued about traditions. Eventually, I stopped reacting. I told myself Eleanor simply struggled with change. Daniel always said the same thing afterward. "She's difficult, Nat. Don't let her get to you." I wanted peace more than I wanted to be right. So I learned to swallow my frustration. There was one thing Eleanor never seemed to accept. I have celiac disease. Even after 5 years, she acted as though it were some trendy diet I'd eventually outgrow. "I still don't understand how a little flour can hurt someone," she'd say while placing bread directly beside my plate. Every Thanksgiving, I solved the problem myself. I made my own gluten-free cranberry sauce. No complaints. No drama. Just one dish I knew was safe. Last Thanksgiving felt no different. At least. That's what I believed when Daniel and I pulled into Eleanor and Arthur's driveway. The house looked exactly as it always had. Warm lights glowing through the windows. Pumpkins lined the porch. The smell of roasted turkey drifting outside before we'd even opened the front door. Inside, relatives filled every room. Arthur was laughing with his brothers. Chloe was helping set the dining table. Children ran through the hallway chasing one another with paper turkeys they'd made at school. It looked like every family holiday I'd attended for the last 5 years. Eleanor greeted us with an overly enthusiastic smile. "Natalie, you brought your special cranberry sauce." She emphasized the word special just enough for me to notice. I did. She glanced at the dish. "Well, hopefully someone besides you actually eats it this year." A few relatives laughed politely. I smiled because it was easier. Daniel kissed my forehead. "I'll help Dad outside." "I'll get this into the kitchen," I replied. The kitchen was unusually quiet compared to the rest of the house. I set my baking dish on the counter and reached for serving utensils. Behind me, the back door creaked open. Eleanor walked onto the porch carrying 2 mugs of coffee. A moment later, her older sister Mildred joined her. I barely paid attention. They often stepped outside to gossip. I was rinsing a serving spoon when I heard my own name. "Natalie?" My hand stopped moving. I told myself to keep washing dishes because I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but then Mildred spoke again. "Are you really going through with it, Ellie? It feels excessive." There was a pause. Then Eleanor laughed softly. "You've seen how she's changed, Daniel." I frowned. Mildred sighed. "I know you don't like her, but it's more than that." Eleanor's voice became quieter. "Our family was perfectly fine before she showed up." Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. I should have walked away. Instead, I stood perfectly still. The kitchen window above the sink was cracked open just enough for every word to drift inside. Mildred lowered her voice. "And you're sure it'll work?" "Oh, absolutely." Eleanor sounded almost cheerful. "It's from an old gardening friend." "What exactly is it?" "A good strong dose mixed into that ridiculous cranberry stuff she insists on bringing." My heart skipped. Mildred hesitated. "What if somebody else eats it?" "They won't." Eleanor answered immediately. "No one touches her gluten-free nonsense." The words barely registered before Eleanor continued. "She'll spend a couple of days violently sick." Then she laughed. "Maybe that'll finally make her stop causing problems around here." Neither woman spoke for a moment. Then Mildred whispered, "What if it's worse than that?" Eleanor didn't sound concerned. "She'll think it's food poisoning." Another laugh. "Serves her right." Every sound inside the house disappeared. The laughter from the living room, The football game playing on television. The children running through the hallway. All I could hear was my own heartbeat. I didn't realize my phone was already in my apron pocket until my fingers found it. Without thinking, I pulled it out, opened the voice recorder, pressed record. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it. The recording captured only the last 30 seconds. More laughter. More comments about how I'd probably blame Eleanor's cooking anyway. Then the porch door opened. I shoved my phone back into my pocket just as Eleanor stepped inside. She smiled at me. "Everything okay, dear?" For one terrifying second, I thought she knew. I forced myself to smile. "Of course." She looked at my cranberry dish. "I'll make sure it gets onto the table." My pulse exploded. "No." The word escaped before I could stop it. She blinked. I quickly recovered. "I'd rather serve it myself." She tilted her head. "Whatever makes you comfortable." Then she walked away. I stared at the baking dish sitting quietly on the counter. A few minutes earlier, it had just been cranberry sauce. Now it felt like evidence. I carried it into the dining room myself. When dinner began, I watched every movement Eleanor made. Every time she stood up. Every time she reached toward the table. Every time someone passed a serving bowl. I barely tasted anything. Daniel leaned closer. "You've hardly eaten." "I'm fine." "You sure?" I nodded too quickly. "Just tired." He studied my face for another second before letting it go. Across the table, Eleanor smiled warmly at everyone. If I hadn't heard her with my own ears, I might have believed she was simply another loving mother hosting Thanksgiving dinner. As everyone finished dessert, Eleanor clapped her hands together. "I've been thinking," she announced. "Next weekend, everyone should come back here." Arthur looked surprised. "For what?" Eleanor smiled directly at me. "I think it's time we all sat down and cleared the air." Around the table, everyone nodded. I smiled back. Inside my pocket, my phone felt heavier than it ever had before, because hidden inside it was 30 seconds that could destroy an entire family. For the next 7 days, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Eleanor's voice again. A good strong dose. She'll spend a couple of days violently sick. Serves her right. I must have replayed that recording 100 times. Each time I hoped I'd misunderstood. That maybe there was another explanation. Another context. Another person they were talking about. There wasn't. The words never changed. Neither did the laughter afterward. I considered telling Daniel dozens of times. Once while we folded laundry. Once during our Friday movie night. Once when we were brushing our teeth before bed. Every time I imagined his face, I stopped. What if he thought I'd misunderstood? What if he defended his mother again? For years, every uncomfortable moment with Eleanor had ended the same way. "That's just Mom." I couldn't survive hearing those words this time. Then, on Wednesday evening, Eleanor sent a message to the family group chat. "Family dinner this Saturday. It's time we clear the air." A smiling emoji followed. I stared at the screen until it went dark. Daniel looked over from the couch. "Mom again?" I nodded. "You don't have to go if you don't want to." His answer surprised me. Normally, he encouraged keeping the peace. Instead, he sighed. "I know she's been hard on you lately." Lately. The word almost made me laugh. 5 years wasn't exactly lately. "I'll come," I said quietly. He searched my face. "You sure?" "I think it's time." He smiled, believing I meant reconciliation. I wish that were true. Saturday arrived gray and cold. Rain tapped softly against the windshield as we pulled into Eleanor and Arthur's driveway. Daniel reached for my hand before getting out. "You okay?" I squeezed his fingers. "I will be." It wasn't a lie. By the end of today, one way or another, everything would finally be different. The atmosphere inside the house felt rehearsed. Arthur greeted us warmly, but the smile faded almost immediately. He looked exhausted. Chloe barely acknowledged me. Instead, she hugged Daniel for an unusually long time. "I'm glad you came," she whispered loud enough for me to hear. "So am I," Daniel answered, clearly confused. Eleanor appeared from the dining room wearing a cream-colored sweater and the same practice-styled smile she'd worn at Thanksgiving. "Natalie." She kissed the air beside my cheek. "I'm so happy you decided to join us." Something about her sweetness made my skin crawl. Dinner itself was strangely quiet. Arthur tried making conversation about work. Daniel talked about a baseball game he'd watched. Even Chloe stayed mostly silent. It felt less like a family dinner, and more like everyone waiting for permission to begin. That permission came with dessert. Eleanor folded her napkin neatly onto her lap before looking directly at me. "Natalie," she said gently, "I've been thinking." I met her eyes. "So have I." She ignored the comment. "I don't think our family can move forward unless we're honest." Arthur shifted uncomfortably. Chloe crossed her arms. Daniel looked from one face to another. "What do you mean?" Eleanor sighed dramatically. "I feel like ever since Natalie entered this family..." She paused. Something changed. Silence spread across the dining room. Our family used to be close. She placed one hand over her chest. "Now everyone walks on eggshells." Chloe nodded immediately. "Mom's right," Eleanor continued. "I've tried to welcome you." I almost blinked in disbelief. "I've overlooked little comments." Another lie. "I've accepted that you don't always appreciate our traditions." Daniel frowned. "Mom!" She raised one finger. "I'm speaking." Then she looked back at me. "I honestly believe you're driving this family apart." No one moved. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed louder. Finally, Chloe spoke. "I didn't want to say anything, Natalie." She looked almost sympathetic. "But you've always acted like you're better than us." Arthur rubbed his forehead. "Maybe we should all calm down." "No." Eleanor shook her head. "This needs to happen. Then she smiled. Natalie deserves the chance to explain herself. For 5 years, I'd imagined this conversation. I'd pictured myself crying, defending myself, listing every insult Eleanor had thrown my way. Instead, I felt oddly calm. I looked at Eleanor. I understand that's how you feel. She blinked. I do? Yes. I nodded. You're entitled to your feelings. The answer caught everyone off guard, especially Eleanor. She'd expected a fight. Instead, she got silence. Daniel looked at me carefully. Natalie. I turned toward him. Can we talk privately? Now? Please. He immediately stood. Of course. Arthur's study smelled faintly of cedar and old books. Daniel closed the door behind us. The noise from the dining room disappeared. He turned toward me. What is this about? His face had changed. He wasn't defensive anymore. He looked worried. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone. I need you to listen to something. He frowned. What is it? I recorded it on Thanksgiving. He looked confused. Recorded what? I took a slow breath. Your mother. His eyebrows lifted. Natalie. Just listen. I pressed play. For the first few seconds, Daniel simply listened. Confusion gave way to curiosity, then to horror as his forehead tightened and the color drained from his face. He didn't interrupt. When the recording ended, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, What? His voice cracked. What was that? I swallowed. The conversation I overheard. He looked at me as though seeing me for the first time. When? Thanksgiving. His eyes widened. Thanksgiving? I nodded. The day she wanted me to eat the cranberry sauce. He stared at the phone. No. I said nothing. He reached toward the screen. Play it again. I did. This time he closed his eyes. Every word seemed to hit harder. A good strong dose. She'll be violently sick. Serves her right. When it ended again, he stood completely still. His hands slowly curled into fists. She. He shook his head. No. Then louder. No. He started pacing. I spent years telling you she was just difficult. Another step. I told you not to take it personally. Another. I kept asking you to be patient. His voice filled with disgust. And all this time, he stopped walking. She was planning to hurt you. I watched tears gather in his eyes. Not sadness. Shame. I failed you. The words were barely audible. I stepped closer. You didn't know. I should have. His jaw tightened. Every single time you tried to tell me something was wrong. He closed his eyes. I defended her. He looked at me again. I'm so sorry. For the first time in years, I believed he truly understood. Then something inside him changed. His shoulders straightened. The guilt disappeared. It was replaced by something colder. Resolve. He picked up my phone. Does anyone else know about this? No. He nodded once. They're going to. He opened the study door. Without another word, he walked back toward the dining room. I followed a few steps behind, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone would hear it. Eleanor looked up the moment we entered. She smiled confidently. Everything all right? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed my phone on the center of the dining table. Then he looked directly at his mother. His voice was calm, almost too calm. Mom? What exactly was your special garden recipe? The smile disappeared from Eleanor's face. For a moment, no one spoke. The dining room, so full of tension only seconds earlier, suddenly felt hollow. Eleanor stared at Daniel as if she'd misheard him. My what? Daniel didn't blink. The recipe. He rested one hand on the back of a chair. The one you discussed with Aunt Mildred on Thanksgiving. Arthur looked from Daniel to Eleanor. What recipe? Chloe frowned. What is he talking about? Eleanor let out a nervous laugh. Oh, honestly, David. She caught herself. Daniel, she corrected quickly. I have no idea what you're talking about. Daniel slid my phone across the polished dining table. I think you do. Her smile became strained. Natalie has obviously filled your head with... No. His voice cut through the room. I listened to it. Something flickered across Eleanor's face. Fear. Only for a second. Then it disappeared behind practiced indignation. Listen to what? The recording. Arthur slowly straightened in his chair. Recording? I finally spoke. The conversation on your back porch. Eleanor looked at me sharply. You were spying on me? I wasn't. You invaded my privacy. I was washing dishes. You recorded me without permission. I recorded the last 30 seconds because I was terrified. Eleanor pushed back her chair. This is unbelievable. Chloe immediately stood beside her mother. Mom shouldn't have to sit here and defend herself against illegal recordings. Daniel's expression hardened. You'll want to hear it before you decide that. Without waiting for anyone's permission, he pressed play. The room filled with Eleanor's own voice. A good strong dose. Nobody moved. No one touches her gluten-free nonsense. Arthur slowly turned toward his wife. His eyes widened. She'll spend a couple of days violently sick. Chloe's confident expression began to crack. Serves her right. The recording ended. Silence settled over the room. Not awkward silence. The kind that follows something irreversible. Arthur spoke first. Eleanor. His voice sounded older than I had ever heard. What is this? She recovered surprisingly fast. Oh, for heaven's sake. She waved one dismissive hand. It was sarcasm. No one answered. She continued. Mildred and I joke like that all the time. Daniel stared at her. You call plotting to make my wife violently ill a joke? I never said I'd actually do anything. You said you had a recipe. It was exaggeration. You said she deserved it. I was venting. You said you'd put it in her food. I never actually did. The excuses came faster now. one replacing another before the last had finished. Arthur rubbed both hands across his face. Eleanor. She looked desperately at him. You know how frustrated I've been. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at me. Natalie. His voice trembled. Did you hear all of this? I did. And that's why you barely ate? I nodded. Arthur closed his eyes. Oh my God. Across the table, Chloe suddenly slammed both hands onto the wood. This is ridiculous. Everyone looked toward her. Mom wasn't actually going to poison anybody. I never said poison, I answered quietly. I said she planned to make me sick. Chloe laughed bitterly. That's basically the same thing. Daniel looked at his sister. No. His tone remained calm. It's intentional harm. You're overreacting. No. You always take Natalie's side. I take evidence seriously. You've changed. Daniel nodded once. You're right. That answer surprised everyone. I have changed. He looked at Eleanor again. I finally stopped making excuses. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears almost instantly. I cannot believe my own son is humiliating me over a private conversation. Daniel's jaw tightened. A private conversation about hurting my wife. I never touched her food. Because she overheard you. I never had the chance to explain. What explanation makes this acceptable? There isn't one. The words escaped before Eleanor could answer. She froze, realizing what she'd admitted. Daniel noticed too. So there isn't an explanation. She immediately shook her head. That's not what I meant. But it was too late. Arthur pushed his chair back. I need some air. He walked toward the hallway without looking at anyone. The front door opened, then closed. The sound echoed through the house. For the first time since I'd known him, Arthur walked away from Eleanor instead of standing beside her. Eleanor's composure completely unraveled. She pointed directly at me. This is what you've wanted from the beginning. What? To turn my family against me. I wanted you to leave me alone. You've always been dramatic. I ignored you for 5 years. You manipulated Daniel. No, Daniel interrupted. I manipulated myself. Everyone looked at him. He took a slow breath. I kept pretending Mom's behavior wasn't serious. He looked at Eleanor. Every holiday, every insult, every comparison to Rebecca, I kept asking Natalie to accept things I never should have accepted. His voice dropped to a whisper. I was wrong. Eleanor reached toward him. Sweetheart. Daniel took a small step back, leaving a painful distance between them. She stared at the space separating them. I don't think I've ever been more disappointed in anyone, he said quietly. Tears rolled down Eleanor's face. I was angry. I know. I didn't mean it. You recorded yourself saying it twice. You even laughed. The room fell silent. Chloe turned to me, her anger replacing any hint of guilt. Happy now? You've destroyed this family. Before I could answer, Daniel spoke. No, Mom did. He pulled out his phone and started dialing. Eleanor frowned. Daniel, what are you doing? He ignored her. When the call connected, he said calmly, My name is Daniel Carter. I need to report a credible threat made against my wife. The color drained from Eleanor's face. Daniel, don't, she whispered. He continued speaking to the dispatcher. My mother discussed secretly putting something into my wife's food to intentionally make her seriously ill. Arthur re-entered the house just in time to hear those words. His shoulders slumped as he immediately understood what had happened. The next half hour passed in a blur. No one touched dessert, and conversation faded to almost nothing. Eleanor alternated between crying and insisting everyone had misunderstood, while Chloe paced the living room muttering that the whole situation was insane. Arthur remained seated with his elbows on his knees, staring silently at the floor. When the police officers arrived, the atmosphere shifted to something far more professional and controlled. Daniel explained everything from the beginning, while I handed over my phone. One officer listened to the recording through headphones as the other took notes, and when it ended, they exchanged a brief glance. They questioned Eleanor, who insisted the entire conversation had been sarcastic and that no reasonable person would have taken it seriously. The officer wrote down every answer without reacting. Eventually, they requested a copy of the recording and informed everyone that the allegation would be investigated. No arrest was made that night. Before leaving, one of the officers looked directly at Eleanor. I strongly advise you not to have any direct contact involving food or any further confrontations with your daughter-in-law while this matter is under review. Eleanor looked as though she'd been slapped. After the front door closed behind the officers, no one moved. Daniel quietly draped my coat over my shoulders, took my hand, and said, Let's go home. As we reached the door, Chloe's voice broke the silence. You've just destroyed our family. Daniel never turned around. No, he said, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. The person who tried to destroy this family never left this house. We walked out into this cold night together. Behind us, Eleanor began sobbing, but for the first time in 5 years, Daniel didn't look back. The week after he called the police was eerily quiet. There were no angry phone calls, no surprise visits, and no dramatic apologies. Only silence. For a few days, I almost convinced myself that reality had finally caught up with Eleanor, that hearing her own words played back in front of her husband, her children, and 2 police officers had forced her to confront what she'd done. I should have known better. People like Eleanor didn't apologize when they lost control. They looked for someone else to blame, and in her mind, that someone was me. The first sign arrived 12 days later. Daniel and I were eating dinner when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and sighed. It's Mom. I looked up. What does she want? He opened the voicemail on speaker. At first, all we heard was crying, heavy dramatic sobs. Then Eleanor began speaking. "Daniel, sweetheart, I don't understand how you could do this to me." She sniffled loudly. "I raised you. I sacrificed everything for you. And now you've chosen her." Daniel's jaw tightened. Eleanor continued. "Your wife has manipulated you." That recording was edited. "I would never hurt anyone." Another pause. "I don't even recognize my own son anymore." The message ended without an apology. Not once did she acknowledge what she'd actually said. Daniel quietly deleted the voicemail. "I used to fall for that." He stared at the dark phone screen. "Every single time." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You don't anymore." "No." His answer came immediately. "I hear something completely different now." "What?" He looked at me. "I don't hear regret anymore. I hear someone who's upset she got caught." If Eleanor's voicemail was emotional manipulation, Chloe chose open warfare. That same evening, Daniel's phone lit up again. Then again. Then again. By midnight, Chloe had sent 17 messages. The first accused me of destroying their mother. The second called me a liar. By the fifth, she was calling me unstable. By the 10th, she'd started insulting Daniel instead. "You're choosing your wife over your real family." Mom was joking. "You're pathetic. Natalie has brainwashed you. One day you'll realize what you've done." Daniel didn't answer a single one. Instead, he took screenshots, saved them in a folder, then emailed them to himself. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Building evidence." I stared at him. A month earlier, that answer would have sounded impossible. Now it simply sounded practical. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, the smear campaign spread beyond the family. I discovered it when my coworker Melissa quietly closed my office door. "HR received an anonymous complaint," she said. "It claims you're emotionally unstable and fabricated serious accusations against your husband's family." I could barely speak. "Who sent it?" She shook her head. "It was anonymous, but our HR director believes it's personal. Everyone here knows your work, and no one's taking it seriously." Relief quickly gave way to anger. Someone wasn't just trying to hurt me. They were trying to damage my career. That evening, I handed Daniel a copy of the HR memo. After reading it twice, he quietly folded the paper. "This isn't random," he said. "They're escalating." The next morning, he blocked Eleanor, Chloe, and every shared family group chat. "They don't get access to us anymore." Later that afternoon, Arthur called from an unfamiliar number. "Your mother wants to fix this," he said wearily. "She says everyone misunderstood." Daniel looked at me before answering. "I want my wife to feel safe. There's nothing to mediate until Mom admits what she did." The call ended a minute later. Neither man sounded angry. They simply sounded heartbroken. 2 days later, I met with an attorney. She listened carefully as I described everything from Thanksgiving through the HR complaint, then reviewed the recording, Chloe's messages, the HR report, and the police incident number. When she finally leaned back, her expression had changed. "This isn't just a difficult family relationship anymore," she said. "It's a documented pattern." She began making notes. She outlined the evidence methodically. The recording, the police report, the repeated harassment, the attempt to interfere with my employment, and a documented timeline showing years of escalating behavior. Looking directly at me, she said, "That's significant." For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt completely believed. There was no hesitation, no minimizing, and no one dismissing it with, "That's just how she is." She recommended creating a complete timeline of every message, voicemail, social media post, and significant interaction, no matter how small. She also advised having the recording professionally transcribed so the judge could read it while listening and no one could later claim the words had been misunderstood. Daniel agreed immediately. Over the next several days, our dining room looked more like an investigation than a home. Text messages, police reports, calendar entries, screenshots, and a professionally transcribed, notarized copy of the recording covered nearly every surface. Together, they showed this wasn't one terrible afternoon. It was years of escalating behavior finally reaching a breaking point. Once everything was organized, our attorney prepared formal cease and desist letters for Eleanor and Chloe. Each outlined the pattern of harassment, referenced the Thanksgiving recording and notarized transcript, demanded all direct or indirect contact stop immediately, and warned that any further harassment could result in civil legal action. Daniel read both letters before they were mailed. "I never imagined I'd send something like this to my own mother." I slipped my hand into his. "I know." He stared at the envelopes for a long moment before quietly saying, "She stopped acting like my mother the day she decided hurting you mattered more than loving me." We mailed the letters the following morning. Neither of us said much on the drive home because deep down we both knew they weren't the end of the story. They were only the beginning of the next battle. The cease and desist letters arrived on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, Eleanor had already ignored hers. Daniel found out when she left another voicemail from an unfamiliar number. He played it while we were making dinner. "Natalie thinks she's won," Eleanor said, through uneven breaths. "But this isn't over. That recording is fake. You've edited it. You've turned my own son against me." Then her voice hardened. "I'll never let her take my family." The voicemail ended in sobbing. Daniel quietly saved the file. "She's escalating," he said. Chloe proved it less than 24 hours later. That night, Daniel received a string of messages from another unfamiliar number. You really sent lawyers after Mom? Congratulations. Natalie finally got what she wanted. You deserve each other. By morning, 23 more messages had arrived, most aimed at me, with insults like gold digger, manipulator, psychopath, and attention seeker. Daniel never replied. He forwarded every message to our attorney before quietly saying, "They're writing our case for us." A week later, we met with our attorney after she called to discuss the next step. She spread several folders across the conference table containing the Thanksgiving recording, text messages, the HR complaint, social media posts, police reports, phone records, and a complete timeline. "I've reviewed everything," she said. "I recommend filing for a civil restraining order." Daniel asked the question I'd been afraid to. "Do we actually have enough?" She nodded. "The recording is concerning, but courts don't decide cases based on one incident. They look for patterns." She gestured toward the evidence. Taken together, the recording, the anonymous complaint to Natalie's employer, the continued harassment after legal notice, the abusive messages, and the online attacks establish a clear pattern of escalating conduct. She paused. "This is no longer one family argument. It's a documented course of conduct." I let out a slow breath. For months, I'd wondered if I was exaggerating or somehow making everything worse. But hearing someone outside the family describe it so clearly reminded me I hadn't imagined any of it. While our attorney prepared the filing, Daniel became fixated on one question. What exactly was in that recipe? Every evening after work, he sat at the dining room table surrounded by gardening books and university research articles. One night, I found him comparing photos of castor beans, oleander, and foxglove on his laptop. "Trying to figure out what Mom meant," he said, explaining that each plant could cause severe gastrointestinal illness if used in the right amount. My stomach tightened. "You think that's what she meant?" He hesitated before nodding. "It's possible." After a long silence, he whispered, "I've been thinking about Thanksgiving." "So have I. What if you hadn't overheard them?" I couldn't answer because I'd asked myself the same question countless times. I almost certainly would have eaten the cranberry sauce, assumed I had food poisoning, and never questioned it. The thought that Eleanor might have watched me suffer while pretending to be concerned frightened me more than anything else. By then, the police investigation had concluded there wasn't enough evidence to pursue criminal charges. Our attorney explained that the legal standard in civil court was different, and the evidence was more than sufficient to seek a restraining order. The court hearing was scheduled 6 weeks later. Despite everything, I barely slept the night before. It wasn't seeing Eleanor that kept me awake. It was the fear that, despite all the evidence, she would somehow convince everyone she was the victim. Sometime after 2 a.m, Daniel noticed me staring at the ceiling. "You awake?" "Yeah." He reached for my hand. "Me too." After a long silence, he said quietly, "I keep replaying every time I told you to ignore her." "You don't have to keep apologizing." He gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "I know, but I think I always will." The courthouse felt colder than I expected, not physically, but emotionally. Muted voices, soft footsteps, and people avoiding eye contact made everything feel unusually heavy. We arrived early with our attorney. About 15 minutes later, Eleanor came through security wearing a navy blue suit, her hair perfectly styled, and a tissue clutched in one hand. She looked less like someone accused of harassment and more like someone attending a funeral. Chloe walked beside her. The moment she spotted us, she rolled her eyes. Our attorney leaned toward me. "Don't react." I nodded. Arthur arrived alone, looking exhausted. When our eyes met, he gave me a small, apologetic nod before taking a seat several rows away from Eleanor. That quiet gesture told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't standing with her anymore. Inside the courtroom, the hearing began quietly. Eleanor's attorney argued first. "This is a tragic family misunderstanding." He described the recording as an emotional conversation taken out of context, argued that Eleanor had simply been venting, questioned whether it represented a genuine threat, and suggested I had become overly sensitive after years of family conflict. I listened without interrupting. Then our attorney stood. Without raising her voice or appealing to emotion, she simply walked to the evidence table. "Your Honor," she said, "this case is not about one conversation." She handed the judge a binder. "It's about a pattern." Page after page documented the same pattern. The timeline, police report, transcript, voicemails, text messages, HR documentation, and screenshots, each reinforcing the last. Finally, our attorney said, "We'd also ask the court to listen to the original audio recording." The courtroom fell silent as the recording played through the speakers. No one moved, coughed, or whispered while Eleanor's own voice filled the room. "Hey, a good strong dose. She'll spend a couple of days violently sick. Serves her right." When it ended, the silence felt even heavier. Our attorney reminded the court that Daniel had later discovered Eleanor cultivated several plants capable of causing severe gastrointestinal illness, including oleander and foxglove. While no one could prove which plant she intended to use, the recording established that Natalie's fear of being intentionally harmed was entirely reasonable. The judge removed his glasses and looked directly at Eleanor. Mrs. Carter, he said evenly, would you like to explain those statements? Eleanor opened her mouth, but, for the first time since Thanksgiving, seemed to have no answer. She stared at the judge for several long seconds before lowering her eyes and dabbing them with the tissue she'd been clutching all morning. Her voice trembled. I was angry. The judge waited. I never intended to hurt anyone. Our attorney said nothing, allowing Eleanor to keep talking. I was frustrated, Eleanor continued. Natalie and I have never understood each other. Sometimes people say things they don't mean. The judge glanced down at the transcript. You described using what you called a good strong dose. Yes. You discussed putting it into food. I was venting. You laughed afterward. Eleanor hesitated. It was nervous laughter. The judge looked up. You also stated serves her right. The courtroom became completely still. Eleanor searched desperately for an explanation. She looked from Chloe to Arthur, then finally to Daniel. My words came out wrong. Daniel didn't move. He simply looked at the woman who had raised him, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked at her like a stranger. Our attorney stood. Your Honor, may I call one final witness? The judge nodded. Mr. Daniel Carter. Daniel calmly took the witness stand and was sworn in. Our attorney kept her questions brief. Mr. Carter, how long have you been married to Natalie? 5 years. Before hearing the recording, how would you describe your mother's behavior? He took a slow breath. I thought she was difficult. And after hearing the recording, I realized I'd spent years minimizing behavior that should have terrified me. The courtroom remained silent as our attorney continued. Did your wife immediately show you the recording after Thanksgiving? No. When did you first hear it? At my parents' house. Why do you believe she waited? Daniel looked at me, his expression softening. Because she was afraid I wouldn't believe her. Those words hit harder than anything else said that day. The attorney nodded. Did you believe her after listening to the recording? I believed my mother's own voice. She asked one final question. Why did you contact law enforcement? Daniel answered without hesitation. Because protecting my wife mattered more than protecting my family's reputation. No one spoke after that. Not Eleanor, not Chloe, not even their attorney. After a brief recess, everyone returned to the courtroom. The judge placed both hands on the bench before speaking. I have reviewed the recording, the transcript, the documented timeline, the police report, the employment complaint, the electronic communications, and the social media evidence. He paused before continuing. This court is not deciding whether criminal charges should have been filed. The question before me is whether the petitioner has demonstrated an ongoing pattern of harassment, creating a reasonable fear for her safety. He looked directly at Eleanor. The evidence establishes that pattern. My heart pounded so loudly I barely heard the next sentence. The court grants a 2-year civil restraining order against Eleanor Carter. The order also applies to Chloe Carter due to her documented participation in continued harassment. Eleanor's shoulders slumped. Chloe shot to her feet. This is ridiculous. Her attorney immediately pulled her back into her chair, but the judge didn't even look up. The respondents shall remain at least 100 yards away from Ms. Carter, her residence, and her workplace. No direct or indirect contact. No communication through third parties. No online references intended to identify or harass the petitioner. He closed the file. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck once. It wasn't loud, but somehow, it sounded like the end of 6 months of fear. Outside the courthouse, reporters weren't waiting. There were no television cameras, no dramatic crowd. Just sunlight breaking through the clouds for the first time all morning. Daniel slipped his hand into mine. We're done. I looked back towards the courthouse doors. Eleanor emerged several minutes later. She looked nothing like the woman who had confidently welcomed everyone into her home on Thanksgiving. Arthur walked several steps behind her. She turned, clearly expecting him to catch up. He didn't. Instead, he quietly walked toward us. Eleanor called after him. Arthur. He stopped, but he didn't return. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Arthur looked at her. I can't do this anymore. Her face fell. You aren't choosing them over me. Arthur shook his head sadly. No, I'm choosing what's right. Then he walked away. I don't think Eleanor ever imagined losing both her husband and her son in the same year. The months that followed were quieter than I expected. Peace didn't arrive all at once. It came through small moments. The first Saturday, Daniel and I drank coffee without checking our phones. The first holiday we spent with friends instead of anxiety. And the first family gathering, where I wasn't wondering what Eleanor might say next. Arthur occasionally met us for lunch, though never for long. He apologized more times than I could count. I should have stopped her years ago. I always answered the same way. You can't change the past. He nodded. I know, but I wish I had. Some relatives who had believed Eleanor's version of events eventually reached out. Most admitted they'd only heard one side. A few apologized. Others simply disappeared from our lives. Honestly, that was fine with me. People who only support you when the truth is convenient were never really standing beside you in the first place. About 3 months after the hearing, Daniel's cousin got married. It was the first large family gathering since everything had happened. As we walked into the reception hall, my eyes went straight to the beautifully decorated table reserved for close family. 2 place cards were missing. Eleanor's and Chloe's. Their chairs had been quietly removed, leaving 2 empty spaces without a single announcement or explanation. Several relatives greeted us warmly. Some hugged Daniel, while others quietly told me they were glad we'd stood our ground. One elderly aunt squeezed my hand and whispered, "I didn't understand before. I do now." Her words meant more to me than she probably realized. Later that evening, Daniel and I stepped onto the venue's terrace as music drifted through the open doors behind us. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "I'm sorry it took me so long." I leaned against him. "For what?" "For believing that keeping the peace was the same thing as protecting you." I smiled sadly. "You know the difference now." "I do." He kissed my forehead. "And I'll never make that mistake again." It's been 6 months since that Thanksgiving. Sometimes people ask whether I regret recording those 30 seconds. My answer is always the same: no. Without that recording, everyone would have believed I imagined everything. Instead, those 30 seconds became the proof that changed all of our lives. They didn't destroy a family. They exposed the truth about one that had already been falling apart. Eleanor wanted to drive me out of her son's life. Instead, she drove herself out of it. In the end, Eleanor lost nearly everything that mattered: her son's trust, her place in our lives, the chance to know any future grandchildren, and the respect she'd spent decades building. None of it happened because of me. It happened because every choice carries consequences. And in the end, Eleanor wasn't trapped by me. She was trapped by the choices she'd made herself.